Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny. I'm here with Chingsung, and today we're gonna. Why are we here today exactly?
So we're here to talk about deck building and deck construction in Magic. I want to do this and sort of break it down for people, a little bit by archetype. And so we're going to work with. I want to do this over time with major archetypes: aggro, control, mid range, ramp. I want to go through a lot of these deck constructions and just sort of show you how the decks operate, play them a little bit so you can get a sense for how they operate and what you're looking for and things of that nature. I'm not always going to be showing metagame decks because it's yeah, sure, sometimes you'll see a metagame deck because they're the best, right? They're the top decks for a reason. But I do want you to go ahead and sort of understand what the principles are so that when you look at a metagame deck, you understand not only how to play it, but also how to attack its weaknesses and things of that nature. And of course, experience will help you refine some of those things. This will give you sort of a baseline for how to approach and understand what a deck is trying to do, and therefore how to defend yourself against it and how to attack it. The deck that I'm going to show you today is a control deck, mostly because control decks are my favorite kind of deck, so we're going to start there. They're not the best right now, but I really do enjoy playing them. I enjoy playing long games of Magic, so I enjoy playing mid-range control and control decks the most. I started my career playing aggro decks because I really think that learning combat map is one of the most fundamental skills in Magic, and the best way to learn that is just to play the red deck and to play the red deck until you are sick of it. But because experience is the best teacher. But ultimately speaking, I want to play a long interactive game of Magic. Basically, my enjoyment of the game is directly proportional to the number of turns the game lasts. So, while that's not 100% true, but it's like a very general trend and very much works out sort of the way that it works for me. So this started as an impetus for the fact that I was mucking around, and I was mucking around with the various metagame decks: Azorius, Yorion, Selesnya, Yorion, Dimir Rogues, all of those decks. I was just kind of mucking around with them for fun. And I noticed that these two cards, Baneslayer Angel and Dreamtrawler, were extremely strong. And so I really just wanted a shell that was playing Baneslayer Angel and Dreamtrawler. Which means that I wanted to play white deck. And of course, because I'm trying to cast 5 and 6 drops, this deck isn't going to be particularly quick, right? So that is really the genesis of this deck. This deck has a lot of weaknesses. It has quite a few bad matchups, so I wouldn't recommend you want to play this if you want to make Mythic. But I really enjoy playing it, and right now, this current configuration was designed for me to test some things. I've learned some things about it, and so I'm going to be making some edits based upon the things that I have learned. One of the things that I was curious about with this is what the best shell was, whether it was going to be red or black that was going to best complement these two cards. Obviously, I have to play blue and white because I'm going to play Dreamtrawler, right? So that means I have to shockingly play blue and white, I know. Whether or not I was playing red and black. And what I did notice, I did try a black version, and maybe I will go back to it. But one of the things that really bothered me about the black version was that I didn't like the consistency of the deck. The black removal spells, Eliminate and a Heartless Act and Murderous Rider are a lot stronger than the red counterparts. It's not even close. But the problem is that as red, I get Spikefield Hazard, which currently in this metagame is a little bit less good, so maybe I should try this with Palaka Predation. But I also get Shatter Skull Smashing as a red dual land. So I have been liking the red. With the way the metagame has shifted, maybe I should go back to playing the black because it's less important. But I have been liking the double-faced cards in red a little bit better, which is why this is red. I've also, but right now this card, Narset the Ancient Way, has been hit or miss for me, so I'm not too sure on that anymore. But there definitely is a black version of this deck that's interesting that perhaps we can talk about at some other point. But I have more experience with the red one, so we're going to talk about the red one.
Okay.
So what are this deck's strengths and weaknesses? It is quite good against any deck that is not playing islands in many configurations. And the reason is pretty simple. This deck plays a lot of very strong interactive and top-end cards. So it plays also with Conqueror's Death, it's going to play Ugin, it's going to play Dream Trawler and Baneslayer Angel, all of which are very strong in the green and red matchups. So when you're playing against mono red, when you're playing against the various iterations of adventures, stuff like that. Now, those decks aren't the most popular right now, but you will still run into them on a regular basis. So in most configurations, this deck is going to be fairly strong against those, particularly because of mass removal, like Shatter in the Sky, and then good interaction early. Those are the kinds of decks that this deck wants to play against. This deck tends to be weaker right now against decks that are playing islands, and particularly decks that play very heavily at instant speed. So Azurius, Yorion, and Dimir Rogues are tough matchups right now. So I've been sort of interested in how to go ahead and address those weaknesses without sort of giving up everything that this deck is good at. Okay. And there are cards that sort of are good in those matchups that will allow us to go ahead and function a little bit better. So we'll start with instant speed threats, because ultimately speaking, you want to be able to deploy pressure against those decks. If you try to play too long of a game against Azurius, Yorion, and Dimir Rogues without the ability to play pressure, then they will just sort of outgrind you. They're very, very good at that. Yes, you can potentially get a key counter spell here or there and turn the game, but really you do want the ability to go ahead and put some pressure on them. So we're going to start with one card that is sort of a little bit feast or famine, but I do really like, and that's Brazen Borrower. All right. So Brazen Borrower is not the greatest in the red matchups, but the Petty Theft instant speed still lets you do something early in the game with it. It can still bounce something and really buy you some time. Not the best use of 2 mana. I would rather be killing the dude with Scorching Dragonfire or countering something. But it's better than nothing. And the awkward thing about Brazen Borrower is it matches up very poorly against Shark Typhoon, which is sort of the premier threat, so to speak, in those longer matchups. If you really aren't playing Shark Typhoon, like this deck isn't based around Shark Typhoon, then you will have a lot of trouble with it because it comes at instant speed and it can make large flying tokens. Yes, you can bounce the flying token with Brazen Borrower, but you'll often want to just play out the Borrower as a 3/1 just to go ahead and start getting ahead. And in that sort of situation, it can be tough. So yes, you can interact with the token that your opponent generates with Shark Typhoon using Petty Theft, but because you're often playing this as a 3-mana 3/1 flash, anytime your opponent hits 6 mana or above, which is very common in those longer matchups, they can just make a 4/4 flyer at instant speed and eat your 3/1. Now, sometimes this gives you some openings to go ahead and do some other stuff. So if you can profitably use that, that makes sense. But definitely there are some issues with playing this card against Shark Typhoon. But we do definitely want the full set of Brazen Borrowers. some of the cards in the sideboard are just stuff I was messing with. So
Hmm.
we're gonna go. This is how I make modifications to the deck and sort of understand what we're looking at. Now you may ask why I'm not playing Shark Typhoon if my plan is in those matchups. Shark Typhoon is perhaps the most important thing to be able to do in a lot of the slower matchups. So the reason that I'm not playing Shark Typhoon is because Shark Typhoon it's a very difficult spell to go over the top with. And it generates a lot of more awkward situations. It is possible right now that that Shark Typhoon is better than Narset, just because of the way that the metagame is breaking down right now. So if I were wanting to go ahead and try a version of this deck that was a little bit more geared towards beating the blue decks, I would be running Shark Typhoons in place of Narset. Narset is pretty good in the green and red matchups where your opponent's playing green deck or red deck, because it does two things. The first is it comes down and immediately kills a guy. Okay, you come down immediately -2 it. You draw a card, discard a non-land card, and kill one of their guys. So you're basically Narset's already traded for a card, because you drew a card and then the card you discarded killed a guy, right? So it's a 4-mana removal spell that puts a planeswalker on the board that they have to deal with. Now, whether that's something simple like they're just pointing the Bone Crusher giant thing at it, or whether they have to attack it, doesn't really matter. It still costs them resources, and it cost you 4 mana and was a removal spell. In the event Narset lives, it takes over the game in the green matchups because of the 2 life that it gains you consistently every single turn. And also, it's a great turn 4 to set up Elspeth Conquers Death. Because if in those matchups, if you play a Narset of the Ancient Way, kill a guy, and the next turn your Elspeth kill a guy or kill a thing, the Elspeth Conquers Death in a couple of turns is going to bring your Narset back. And it really can just sort of start that snowball rolling where there's no way for them to be able to get ahead. Okay, so I think that the configuration of this deck could definitely be altered to go ahead and be stronger against Dimir Rogues. And if you wanted to do that, I think the Shark Typhoon versus Narset construction is a very reasonable way to go ahead and play it. So I'm going to go ahead and put 3 Shark Typhoons in the board as well. I may want access to all 4, ultimately speaking, because of the way that these games play out. Okay, so now obviously I have too many cards in my sideboard, but that's fine. We'll deal with that later. So this is the core construction of the deck. So you play early interactive spells: Spikefield Hazard, Essence Scatter, the Force Spike here, Negate, Scorching Dragonfire, Brazen Borrower, Bone Crusher Giant, Naturalize. And then you want some good, strong mid-range stuff. The Shatter the Sky and Narset sort of exemplify that, sort of things that sort of will begin to stabilize you. And then what you're looking to do after that is go over the top. This is why I'm playing Gadwig the Wizard. I think a lot of people underestimate this card. But in a lot of the matchups where you do need him, he is very, very strong. So particularly, once again, this deck is constructed to be a little bit stronger against the green decks. And once again, here we have the fact that he can just be played as a 3-mana 3/3. But also later in the game, when you draw him, he can be played as a 6-mana 3/3, draw 3 cards or something along those lines. I often cast Gadwig I wouldn't say often, I regularly cast Gadwig for 3 and 4. The reason is because both of those things do something very useful to me. If I'm playing against like mono red, for example, just playing a 3-mana 3/3 often puts me in a situation where they have to do something about it. They can either not attack with their like Robber of the Rich and they're like Fervent Champion or whatever they played on turn 1, right? Or they can spend a turn killing the Gadwick, but that means that they're not playing Anax, or they can't. Well, they might not be able to Embercleave, set up an Embercleave the next turn, or something along those lines. It's going to slow them down, right? Even if their play is to kill my Gadwick with a Scorching Dragon Fire, and then attack, and then play Light Up the Stage. They're a little bit less well set up because they probably have to play the Light Up the Stage after combat instead of pre-combat, right? Sorry, they have to play the Light Up Stage after playing a land instead of before playing a land, because in a lot of those situations, either if I'm on the play or on the draw, they may not have the ability to go ahead and set up their mana properly. If they do need to play the Light Up the Stage after playing a land, it's a lot weaker, because then if it hits 2 lands, you automatically lose a card. In this kind of metagame, it's a little bit less likely because so many people are playing the double face cards. But it can still cause some awkwardness, because then they have to spend all their cards that they got from Light Up the Stage next turn. Or they lose a card. So you can set up some more interesting situations. So for example, if they hit like a shock and a 2-drop, right, off their Light Up the Stage, you can just play a creature that can't be shocked. And then they have this weird situation where either they could lose the shock or the 2-drop and deal with your creature again, or they can go ahead and ignore and sort of only get 1 card off their light. Gadwick is very good at setting up those kinds of situations when played as a 3-mana 3/3. As a 4-mana 3/3, he draws you a card, so whatever they do to go ahead and remove him, you're basically up a card because he already replaced himself. And he buys you some time. So that's what's the critical thing about a lot of these, is that they're just going to buy you enough time to set up to play your big spells. Elspeth Conquers Death, Ugin, Baneslayer Angel, Dreamtrawler. There's another Baneslayer Angel in the sideboard. There could be a 3rd Dreamtrawler in the sideboard, and maybe with the new configurations where I need some stuff that's a little bit stronger, there very well could be the idea of moving up to 3 of each of these post-board. And so that's sort of the basic construction of what you're looking for when you play Control. Your early game needs to be interactive and needs to be, I would say, a good half your deck, if not a little bit less than half. If you look here, I have 37 non-creature spells. I mean, I have a little bit more than that because of the lands things. Usually you're going to be about 30, 32, 33, 34, right? If you don't have the double face cards. That's sort of the range you're going to be, 32, 33, 34 cards. Now, if you look here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 12, 14, 16 early game interactive cards that cost 1, 2, or 3 mana. Gadwick sort of classifies a little bit, so we'll call this like 18 or so early game cards, probably 17 or 18 early game cards. That's, if you go ahead and look at my typical spell count of 34, that's about half my cards. It's a lot, right? And you want to make sure that a lot of those cards are usable in the early game. That's the first 3 turns of the game. Now, a lot of these cards also need to function later in the game, though. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of players fail to understand what control decks are doing, because a lot of these cards, in addition to being useful in the early game, they can't be useless late in the game. And so this is why it's so useful to go ahead and have the double face cards, because the double face cards act as a land drop later in the game. So this card is, for example, is not useful past like turn as a card, the Jawari Disruption. That first half is probably not very useful past turns 4 or 5, maybe, because a lot of the time they just have the extra mana to pay. But on the other hand, you can just play it as land. And when you're trying to cast Dream Trawlers and these bigger cards, that flexibility to play it as a land is very nice. Same is true for Spikefield Hazard. Although, funnily enough, I've killed lots of people with 1 damage spike field hazards to the face, but that's neither here nor there, and it's typical situation where you just have to look for unexpected use of the card. These 3 cards are sort of the same thing on the other end, right? I have 3 big spells that are kind of useful later in the game. This makes me 2 4/4 flyers. This draws me a whole bunch of cards typically, and this clears the board, right? But once again, early in the game, they can all be played as lands and help me sort of make my land drops. It's very important to make your land drops in a control deck because you will need to go ahead and make sure you're able to cast your 4, 5, and 6 drops on time, because those are kind of like the power slots for a lot of the control decks in that range. And you often have things like Castle Ardenvale or Castle Vantress. They're going to generate you long-term advantage that you can pump lots of mana into. It is possible, due to the way that deck metagame is possible, I should be at 1 Ardenvale and 2 Vantress. I'm not really sure about that at this point. But that's sort of the way the deck is built. And so it's very important to understand your mana versus spell balance. And one of the nice things about double face cards is they allow you to skew more heavily towards spells. This deck has 23 natural lands in it, which is much lower than I would typically recommend for a control deck. 26, 27, 28, even in some cases 29 common land counts that you should see if you're playing a control deck, which means you're going to need cards like Castle Ardenvale and Castle Vantress that allow you to use large amounts of mana, in addition to the bigger spells that you're casting. So the basic plan of this deck is going to be to go ahead and utilize these early interactive spells, stabilize in the mid game off of Gadwick, Narset, Shatter to the Sky, Elspeth Conquers Death, and your 5 drops, and then win the game with their grindy spells, which is Elspeth Conquers Death, Baneslayer, Angel of Dream Trawler, maybe an Ugin later in the game. Some things I noticed about cards that are important. Let's go ahead and switch views. These are the things that I was using. So it's important to have a little bit of extra early interaction against the quicker decks, right? Cinderclasm has been very strong in that respect. And I've been on the fence about Soul Guide Lantern versus the Rakdos matchup specifically. It's pretty much useless in every single other matchup. It's really there specifically to deal with Kroxa. Kroxa can pseudo be dealt with Spikefield Hazard and Scorching Dragonfire, so maybe. Maybe I would go down to 1 of this card, because the first one is nice, the second one is almost always superfluous. So that's where I'm going to get 1 of my slots in the sideboards. I'm going to go down to 1 Soul Guide Lantern. I may even cut this depending on how I feel about things. I was originally trying Heliod's Intervention against because it's useful against the green decks, because they try to Great Henge you, and therefore if they're trying to Great Henge you, blowing it up as well as gaining a life is useful. This was also sort of a hedge against Embercleave. It turns out the best way to deal with Embercleave is just to not let it hit the table. Heliod's Intervention proved to be kind of like, I was trying to do it because it also has some hedgy benefits against like the Yorion decks, because they're all playing Omens and things of that nature, and Elspeth Conquers Death that you can blow up with Heliod's Intervention as well. Turns out that that's not really a useful plan. It's just better to play threats like Shark Typhoon and Brazen Borrower. Heliod's Intervention is going to go by the wayside. And then the last thing is going to be interactive spells against the other decks. I noticed that Negate has been stronger than I sort of expected. 1, because it's useful in the slower grindy matchups as just a 2-mana counter instead of a 3-mana counter that matters a whole lot. And surprisingly, a lot of the aggro decks right now are adventure decks, and this counters an adventure. So it's really hilarious when your opponent goes end of turn, Bonecrusher Giant stomp you, right? Try to play the Bonecrusher Giant on turn 3 and you just negate it, and you counter both halves of it. Or even the better one is when they go turn 1 Edgewalling Keeper, right? Turn 1 Edgewalling Keeper, and they go turn 2 turn 2 tap land, and they play the Lovestruck Beast adventure in order to try to set up the Lovestruck Beast on turn 3. And that that can be kind of hilarious because it can counter an adventure card where they go for the full value, so to speak. And I've been having much better success than anybody ever should have playing Negate against the adventure decks, because so many people just won't just play the first half first. They default to value play the adventure half, and you catch them with Negate so often. So I've been having a good success. So I'm going to go up to the full 4 negates. Mystical Dispute has been very hit or miss for me. I've much preferred just having Negate in a lot of situations, so I'm probably going to go down a Mystical Dispute. I don't think the second Ugin is necessary. It's been easy enough for me to grind out games with the top end that I have right now, especially if I put in a third Dream Trawler. The second Ugin should prove to be unnecessary. So let's go ahead and put that in right now. And so right now we're 2 slots over. I think this Neutralize has always been a sort of hedge and is a little bit unnecessary. And I may only need 2 and I think I'm going to go down to 2 Cinderclasms because I like having access to the third Bone Crusher Giant. This is once again another useful way to deploy pressure against the slower decks, where they kind of just like have to deal with it. You can just stomp them on turn 2 and then play a Bone Crusher Giant, and it sort of forces their hand and like they have to do something. In much the same way that Brazen Borrower kind of does, and because it has 4 power, they have to get to 7 to Shark Typhoon it profitably, which is an extra turn and sort of allows you to take some more time to set up to defend with Brazen Borrowers and sort of have other things to do once they go ahead and can Shark Typhoon it successfully. It also sort of combines with your damage-based removal spells, Scorching Dragonfire and Spike Field Hazard, which you're never boarding out Spike Field Hazard just because it's a land in addition. So worst comes to worst, it's a land. And to go ahead and to allow you to go ahead and have that flexibility to go ahead and kill, like, 3/3s or 4/4s or something like that. If they're bringing in dudes that you kind of have to deal with, or they just play like a 4/4 Shark Typhoon, right? So I think that what I learned about in playing this deck is that in this format, what matters really more is your power spells. So this is the Shark Typhoons and Dream Trawlers and Baneslayer Angels. And a lot of the early game interactive spells you have, Scorching Dragonfire, Negate, Essence Scatter, Brazen Borrower, or whatnot, are all kind of generally useful. Like they will serve you okay in a lot of situations. And so I think that it's good to go ahead and just be a little bit more flexible on this. I kind of want a second Essence Scatter in this build. Not really sure what to cut for it, so I'm just going to put it in as a 61st card. I don't have as big of an aversion to playing 61 cards as a lot of other people, and I'm not really sure where the best cut is, so we're just going to play with 61 for a little bit so that I have a better sense for what the best thing to do here is. And so this is the deck that I'm going to be playing, and we can go ahead and get some sense for, how it's going to do and its strengths and weaknesses, and we can go ahead and talk about those and make changes at the end.
Okay. I'm pleased with this because when you mentioned this is going to be a control deck, honestly, I thought it's going to be black and blue. But no, you it's red, it's white. Is it these sets make using these colors? Does this set allow more flexibility with control decks and just dealing with just black and blue all the time?
Well, so there's a reason why the classic control deck control colors are black, white, and blue. And so when I talked about earlier flexibility in the early and late game, That means cards that are effective at controlling the board or the stack in both the early and the late game. That means counter spells and removal, right? And so the reason the classic controllers, the control colors are black and blue is because blue has the counter spells, black has the removal, right? So Essence, Scatter, and Negate, they do the same thing on turn 2 that they do on turn 15. Neutralize does the same thing on turn 3 as it does on turn 15, right? The limitation of a counterspell, which I think a lot of people don't understand, don't really, I wouldn't say understand, but don't like play to when they are playing against control decks, is the mana has to be available when they play the spell, right? That's the limitation of the counterspell. If I don't have the 2 or 3 mana available right when you play your spell, the counterspell is worthless against the threat you just played. Right. This is why a 1-drop is so strong against a good 1-drop is such a strong way to start against a lot of control decks. Because if you play a 1-drop, now I want a choice. Your 1-drop I can't counter, basically ever, right, in standard. Right. Sometimes I can't even counter your 2-drop because you're on play and I don't have counter spells. Right. So 1 and 2 drops are so strong because they get underneath the counter spells. Like they are never effective because I'm never going to have mana available when you play them. Now, once they're on the table, I have to make a decision. At some point, I have to spend some mana to deal with the threat you play. If I do nothing, your 1 mana 1/1 is going to kill me in 20 turns. Now, that's very unlikely to happen in a practical game, but the point is that it still forces a response. Now, if you just played a Savannah Lion, that cuts down the clock to 10 turns, right? Yes, practically that 1 mana 2/1 is not going to go all the way. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to position in later turns. You can say, I can play this 3 or 4-drop threat, and then now you have to spend your mana to deal with the 1-drop or the 3-drop or 4-drop threat I played. This is why it's so important for control decks to have access to sweepers, right? Shatter the Sky is important because that allows the control deck to then make the decision, oh, great, you played a 4-drop creature. Now I can choose to not use my counterspell on the 4-drop creature. Untap, Shatter the Sky with Essence Scatter as backup on turn 6. Right? Now everything is dead, and I have a counterspell to stop your next incoming threat. But once again, that's turn 6. Right? On turn 4, if I make that same decision, you now have free reign to do whatever you want because there's nothing that can be counterspelled. Right? So the reason the black spells are so strong is because let's take a look at something like here, Heartless Act. Okay. Once again, kill a creature with no counters on it, right? This is equally effective against a 1-drop or your 6-drop, right? And so that flexibility allows the black deck to once again use this card in the early game and the late game, right? This is why something like Eliminate is so important as well when playing in formats where 3 mana planeswalkers are relevant, because, okay, yeah, sure, this isn't going to kill your 3-drop, but this kills the Liana of the Veil, or Oko, right? Or Teferi, right? Or Narset, right? This kills strong 3 mana planeswalkers that are going to see play, and a lot of those times, those planeswalkers aren't coming out of, super aggressive decks, right? They're coming out of slower decks that can take advantage of the fact that they are planeswalkers. So that means that this card is useful sort of in a lot of stages of the game when those threats are common. Now, I wouldn't be playing this card today, in today's standard formats because there really aren't relevant 3 mana planeswalkers, right? It's just 1 to 3-drop creatures, so I probably would just go ahead and play Heartless Act, right? You also have Murderous Rider, right? And once again, the exact same thing. Flexibility in the early, mid, and late game, right? A lot of your answers need to go ahead and be flexible there. But here's the thing. That's not just unique to control decks. That's unique. That's something that any deck that doesn't just want to kill you in 5 turns benefits from. Any deck that wants to be able to go to the mid or late game benefits from having flexible answers. So it's not unique to control decks. What is unique to control decks that I think a lot of people don't understand is this power endgame. Okay, it is not about all the defensive spells. It is about being able to get to an end game that overwhelms your opponent. Okay. Now, this is in many ways similar to ramp deck. Ramp decks try to get there by bypassing the early and mid game. A ramp deck goes, I play these 3 spells and it gets me to 9 mana, and then I can play lots of stupid things, right? A control deck, instead of playing those cards, instead of filling their deck with those cards that gets them to that 9 mana endgame, can often play the same endgame, only its entire way of getting there is I'm just going to make 9 land drops, right? I'm going to play 9 turns of magic instead of accelerating them. And so it's 2 different philosophies, but you need the exact same things for a ramp deck that you do for a control deck, which is those overpowering endgames. Okay, and this is why you see a lot of times like a mid-range control deck, like a Yorion deck or something, often feels a lot like a control deck because it's doing the exact same thing. You're interacting early to get to this overwhelming endgame, right? The key for a control deck is inevitability. Every single land drop I make and every single turn the game goes on should increase my chance of winning. And that's how you should look at a control deck, not as counter everything you do. It is every single turn of magic that is played is good for me. All right. And I think that's a discrepancy that I think some people fail to understand. So I wanted to. So yeah, thank you for asking that question.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Great. Viewers, stay tuned. In our next episode, this is the deck you're gonna use to try out
Correct.
next time, right? All right. All right. Excellent. Yeah, we're gonna see this in action, and we can't wait to see your reactions. Stay tuned.